Good morning and thank you for joining us for this special panel discussion inspired by the AGC London Build-to-Rent Market Report 2026. Today we're bringing together a group of industry leaders who are at the forefront of shaping London's evolving build-to-rent sector, a market that continues to grow in scale, sophistication and importance within the wider UK property landscape. What's particularly interesting is how the conversation has shifted. We are no longer just talking about units and yields, we are talking about communities, well-being, retention and brand. And that's exactly what we are here to explore today. I'm delighted to be joined by Lesley Roberts, Director of Build to Rent at Related Argent, Justine Edmonds, Director of Build to Rent at LRG, and Sophie Wilson from AGC BTR, who had an instrumental role in creating this report. Thank you all for being here. Let's start with what's really driving the London build-to-rent market today. The report makes it clear that this is fundamentally a demand-led story, but also one shaped by supply constraints, institutional capital, and changing lifestyles. Justine, you described build-to-rent as being fundamentally demand-led, driven by flexibility and professionally managed homes, but also constrained by delivery challenges. How do you see that balance playing out over the next few years, particularly with the move towards more service-led living?
What we're seeing is demand isn't an issue, it's the viability piece. So where the cost of capital has increased, it's eroded the returns because of interest. I think the difference that we'll see over the next few years is, I think, a lot more amenity-like BTR.
And Lesley, you highlighted the role of institutional capital and the demographic shifts, particularly millennials and Gen Z delaying home ownership. From your perspective, how much of this growth is structural and how much is just cyclical?
I think its majority is structural. I think with home ownership for the millennials being out of reach now is a big issue, with affordability being up around 8 or 9 times their income. I think that that's out of reach for a lot of people. And so therefore we're seeing, although there is a lot of institutional capital that wants to go into this market, that to Justine's point, it's actually quite hard to make it stack. But I do think the issues that we're having are structural rather than cyclical. I think we're in new territory.
And Sophie, we're hearing a lot about demand, but also the constraints around viability and delivery, as we've just heard. Where do you see interior design and amenity strategy playing a role in unlocking value, especially when schemes need to differentiate more than ever?
I think at the moment we really need interior design just to work harder than it has before. So we're wanting well-designed apartments that are going to make people happy to live there, make great homes, and therefore kind of extend retention. We just really need the spaces to speak to the local community and the local area and just really create that sense of home and community within these developments so that they're really wanting people to live there for as long as possible, essentially.
And then this moves on to one of the strongest themes in the report is that renters are becoming far more discerning and design is no longer just about aesthetics, it's part of the overall value proposition. Lesley, you said that design now goes far beyond layout and finish and that amenity spaces are increasingly decisive in leasing decisions. What are you seeing in practice? What are the features that are genuinely influencing whether someone chooses one scheme over another?
I think it's of course, there's the big sales walk, you know, the lovely things that they might choose and want to. It's almost like a buffet, right? It's not actually about how much you eat, it's about the selection that you get. But in terms of what they actually use and what they actually value, it is the spaces that they use a lot. So co-working is a massive thing. Gyms are a massive thing. They're almost like a hygiene factor now because hybrid working became a thing after COVID. Now it's actually embedded in our lifestyle. So the ability to be hyper-connected whilst you're in your home or in the co-working spaces is really important. So, and that also means that those spaces need to be fit for purpose for work. And so they have to be, you know, nice desk spaces or booths with good acoustics, good connectivity, like Wi-Fi connectivity, but also then, the plushness of not feeling like you're in a sterile office, which is one of the benefits of being at home and being able to work in your pajamas whilst you're still. And I think the other part is that it feels like an extension of your home, so you don't have to sort of dress up to go down to the communal spaces, but at the same time be respectful of your neighbours, I would say. I think another feature of design that genuinely influences the way that people, why they choose a scheme is also that it's thought through. So it's aesthetically pleasing because they go in there every day and it's something that they wouldn't otherwise be able to afford to buy. So I do think that's another thing that we really focus on. And the thoughtfulness of the use of spaces. So not just to have like where you might walk into a space and think, oh, why is that there? It feels natural. Like the design elements are really well thought through and they flow. So it doesn't feel like it's a disconnect. So there's another part of the design feature, I think, is actually the physical layout, which is really important. But when you layer on top of that the interiors, there is a differentiation of spaces, but they also feel like they fit together. And that is a skill of an interior designer, which isn't a cookie cutter, and it feels unique to their choice, to that particular development, and it doesn't feel like every other development. And then ultimately, I think the choices that people make speak to their style preferences, and then they walk in and they think, I can picture myself here. I can picture myself here.
So can I.
Justine, you made a really interesting point that residents are now customers as much as tenants, and that homes need to feel effortless to live in, just as Lesley said. What does that mean in practical terms, and how does it impact long-term performance?
What we're seeing is when the use of tech is used appropriately, and again, to Lesley's point, design feels effortless, that helps retention. So obviously amenities attract residents, but actually what, build retention is when it's effortless. We live in a click and collect society. So when things are easy, that's where we're seeing less churn in buildings.
And that obviously helps.
Absolutely,
return.
Yeah, helps returns.
Yeah. And Sophie, we've heard about functionalities, storage, hybrid working, durability, but also about creating identity and a sense of place. How do you balance designing for longevity with creating that initial impact that draws people in?
So I think obviously you've got to have that initial impact. You want that great marketing shot to get your future tenants through the door initially. And then it's all about longevity in terms of for your own kind of OPEX, but also for the word of mouth of clients as well. If they're having a great time in your development, they might bring their friends along as well. Bases that start to feel a little bit tired, they may then move on from. You don't want that, and we don't want that. So we're always designing furniture that will be long lasting and hopefully get your return on investment as well.
It's a really nice piece about that. I was thinking, like, what are the things that I really appreciate? And I've Debra's seen my place. I've not long refurbished, and I chose some handles in my kitchen that are antique brass color, and I've been using them now for a year, and they're starting to get a patina. Yeah. And now I know which cupboard I go to the most, but it's a lovely thing about something that's durable, but actually it still shows character. So I think that BTR developments are really young at the moment, and we haven't really seen massive amounts of upgrades over time. But I think it would be really interesting as we go through, because it would be things like, the Friends Cafe has a fantastically famous leather couch. And a leather couch is a really nice way to say, this feels like it has character, it's lived in, but it's still durable, it's still comfortable. And I think that there is an element that we want things to be fresh, and I think that's really important to create a palette and a design that you can upgrade and up spec occasionally, but at the same time, it's still people's homes. So it's nice to have a fresh lick of paint, and it's nice to do, but I also am conscious that this is people's homes that We want to be able to, so they can feel like it's something that they've got an attachment to, not like an old jumper that you forget how actually bad it is until somebody goes, really, you're going to wear that out of the house? But it's more like, it's more like a cashmere, so it lasts over time and it still looks good, but it's a firm favourite. Do you know what I mean? I think it's really
doesn't
important.
feel characterless because it's too new.
Yeah,
Yes.
and it doesn't feel a little bit too naff because it's old.
Yeah. The balance. So has design now moved from being a nice to have to an essential part of the offer in London Build to Rent?
I mean, I fundamentally, at Related Argent, we are all very much about design. We're very passionate about design in everything. And I personally think it's something that, even to the uneducated eye, if you put a design element in there, they will somehow recognise the value of it without actually knowing why. And it's something I've learned over time working with different partners and different developers, that those who really get design really, really get it. And they are the developments that I think will perform better over time, because there's something intrinsically foundational about what's created. And I think that they will outlast and perform better. That's my personal view.
Justine?
The bit that I like getting involved right at the start, so at the design stage. So I'm very heavily involved in single family, and I'm working with a lot of house builders at the moment where they're actually, identifying parcels and putting together specs for single family housing units rather than the private sale. And when we get involved right at the design stage, that's where we notice a big difference, because the house builders, they're financed to sell, so they create a product that is for the private sales market, and there is a big difference between that and single family. So what I'm seeing in the design stage is a lot more house builders are open to speaking to you about it.
And when you say it makes a difference, what do you think that difference is?
So for an example would be, I was dealing with one house builder and they wanted to flip their private sale units to BTR, and there were townhouses, there were fogs, there were too many larger units, because they don't understand how institutional capital allocate their funding when they go to their investment committee. So they'll go heavy on the 4 beds, and I'm like, oh no, there's too many 4 beds in this parcel. That's the difference that I think they are getting a lot more. They're listening to us a lot more, I think.
I think it's intrinsic. I think we're now in a mature market where we can learn from some of our operational expenses and try and implement that then in our new builds, and where we can use interior design just to make things more efficient and to make it a better development overall.
Yeah,
I think it's about the layers. Your base floor plan is one part of the design. Your customer experience that you layer on top of that, and how you navigate through the communal spaces and all that sort of stuff, is another part. There's the operational design for efficiency and the products and so forth that they choose, and then the final sort of layering is the final brush of the interiors and making it really pop. So I think there's a skill and a layering of design that goes across every spectrum of the asset life cycle. And of course, designing for investment returns is another element of design, but it's all marginal gains, and that's, it's a pretty broad question, but I think it's at every level.
Yeah, I agree. There's a strong commercial thread running through the report that design directly impacts leasing, speed, satisfaction and retention. Sophie, from your perspective, where does interior design have the greatest measurable impact? Is it first impressions, is it day-to-day experience, or is it long-term loyalty?
I do think it's important that all of those aspects, but I would say the day-to-day is really crucial, because that is, again, we are talking about people's homes at the end of the day. So if it's done well, you've got people staying for longer, you've got more use of the space if it's designed not just for day and night, not just for co-working. If there's multi-uses spaces, you don't want any kind of void within your communal spaces, as well as you don't want them to feel restricted in their apartment. They want to have enough storage, all that kind of stuff. I think it will really just make a better overall home.
And Lesley, you spoke about creating a sense of belonging, which we've talked about, rather than environments that feel overly corporate or impersonal. As you said, it is someone's home. Do you see a clear difference in performance between schemes that achieve that and those that don't?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we all, like it or not, like to live in a community, or acknowledge it or not. A community makes a massive difference to the reasons why you stay somewhere. It may not be the reason why you go somewhere to live, although we do find in a lot of our developments, and I think that this is true for, I remember Jackie from Savills telling me the statistic around the majority of people come from something like a 5-kilometre radius of any development. And a lot of that's because they're already established in that area and their family might live close, or they know the area and their familiarity. And again, it's community-based why they might live somewhere. I think the reasons why they will stay is because they feel a sense of belonging. And I think it's that sense of belonging is also layered in many ways. So the fact that they like the space that they live in, it's comfortable, it has the right storage, it's thoughtful, they can have friends, pets, they can have a social life, they can have do their sports, and there's amenities nearby. I think all of those things are really important. And I think there is a space for a corporate market, of course, but it doesn't necessarily mean to say that your development has to feel corporate, because I think even those people who are on corporate residences, they still want to feel like home, right? They still want the concierge or the service or the people in the building to say hi and know their names, and it's a nice way to meet people. I think we are intrinsically social animals, so it's an important factor, and I do think it makes a difference to performance. Less churn for sure.
Yeah. And Justine, from an investment perspective, is design now being treated as a core driver of asset performance over time, rather than just part of the delivery?
I think so. It definitely affects the lease up stage, which is, that's really heavily looked at. But what I'm finding where I do a lot of underwriting papers for investment committees, they are looking at the product and the design. So for an example, yesterday I was speaking to one fund about expansion joints on a house. Like, I'm kind of like, this is bizarre, but they are looking at that. So what I'm also finding is, with, again, the house builders, I work with a couple of pension funds, and I'm having to go in and change the spec quite a bit. It's just the most, I think it's very basic, but things like carpet in the communal area, in a hallway, change it to Candine or Antico. It's just like small things like that you probably you miss. But I do say that I'm probably at an unfair advantage because I have a degree in interior design, so people hate it when I get involved because I'm like a hawk, and my clients get freebies. But yeah, I think overall, yes, it does contribute, but I think the operational piece is larger than the design piece.
Before we close on design, I'd just like to bring it back to something that sits at the heart of Build to Rent, which is community. We've talked a lot about design, operations and performance, but ultimately these developments are about how people live and connect. In your views, what role does design play in creating a genuine sense of community with the Build to Rent scheme? And how can it go beyond just providing shared spaces?
I think a really well-designed scheme, it sort of goes back to what we said at the start, a really well-designed scheme has thought through a customer journey, but it also creates spaces where people can do their own thing, but also incidental touch points that encourage people to run into each other and actually exchange and integrate without being forced. Like I don't like forced fun, but actually those incidental points where you can then create a a moment, if you like, to then have a discussion with somebody. And that could be, you know, in one of our developments at Brent Cross at the Maple, we have this huge super lobby table, and you can sit at it, and people sometimes do, but we've put some jigsaws there, and that is just a way to get people to encourage them. And I was so worried that people haven't done jigsaws before, because it just seems like such an odd old pastime. I love jigsaws. We put a little instructions there about actually build the border first, then go by colour, and surprisingly we're about up to our third or fourth, because people love the jigsaws, and it just means it's a touch point that they can get, and there's space in between them, so that it's not too close to be too familiar, but people can just dip in and dip out. And obviously pets are a big thing, you know, having pet parties and then we've also at the Maple had an enormous amount of families come in, and it's a huge demographic for us that we didn't foresee coming through, but it is one of the very few schemes that is in urban London, but actually is almost a family style housing. I don't know if there's too many others, and we have attracted huge numbers of families. And what that means is that we have a lot of people who come together because of the families, and they go to the park and they use the park and they socialise. And there's a really magnificent pool. So now we're putting on you know, swimming lessons, and that's not just for children, but obviously after school and things like that. We're planning events because of the demographic, but the design bit is being able to use, in the case of Brent Cross Town, we can use the whole neighbourhood, because it's a master plan, and it's got a great regeneration scheme, and it's a phased development. So we have the opportunity to have, you know, neighbourhood square and the big fountain that the kids love to play around. And to use all the facilities, and that a lot of that is about thoughtful design, and having the capacity as a master developer is a huge advantage, and having a long-term view is a huge advantage, because you can really plan things. However, even down to just the way the super lobby is designed, the interaction points, every core feeds into the super lobby, so you have those incidental touch points for people to be able to go, oh yeah, hi, oh yeah, right, I remember you, how did you, and that builds that community, and I think that makes a massive difference.
So the design facilitates the community,
exactly,
and if it's done well.
Yeah, and it then is a virtuous circle, because it keeps embedding its own.
Yeah. Justine?
If you take Eddington for an example, that is for me, it's a really impressive scheme, because you've got multifamily and you've got single family in the same space. Having those amenities with single family on its own doesn't work, but because you've got the build to rent scheme with it, it works really well. So actually what we see is, this is Eddington in Cambridge, which is Patchy Capital's scheme. They have got the single family families actually integrating with the multifamily. So where you've got overseas residents coming over that might want an apartment, that may have children, they're actually integrating with the, you know, maybe the British residents that want a house and want that garden, and they're actually integrating because of that shared space.
Great. Sophie?
Well, I loved Lesley's story about the jigsaws. I think that was really sweet, and just a really good example of how spaces are just there to facilitate community. So we may provide designated areas, but as long as they're flexible, and as long as it leans into who your target demographic is and your local area as well. I think once you acknowledge those and you really understand that, you're going to get more out of your amenity spaces and more out of the design.
Yeah, the flexibility of spaces is really important. So we've got a rooftop, I think you've seen it, rooftop garden lounge, terrace area with barbecues and so forth. So it's great social spaces, and people can either take the whole space, they can just hire a section of it if they like for exclusive use. And it's been used for 50ths, it's been used for bar mitzvahs, it's been used for kids' parties, and it's completely flexible, but it's fit for purpose for all of them. And that makes a big difference, because then you've got better use of the space, and you don't have to have several of them. And it's also, really comfortable for everybody to use, and it's very nice facilities, but it's not it's not a commercial kitchen or anything that's over the top. It doesn't have to be overcomplicated, and it's actually really successful because sometimes, you know what they say: the Americans spent millions going to the moon to find to find a pen that wrote in space, and the Russians said, well, we just use a pencil. Right? Sometimes you can over-engineer things, and it almost feels like I don't know what to do in this space now because it's too formulaic or it's too forced. I think sometimes the looseness of the space, but just give a nod to all these different things. So in that space, we don't have a screen. We don't put a TV there deliberately because we don't want it to be. There is actually a simulation room for sports simulation, and it's very obvious. This is a sports simulation space, but it can be used for kids' parties as well, and you can put Peppa Pig on and stuff.
It's flexible.
But it's flexible. But the roof terrace is more about actually come and enjoy the view and each other's company, not a screen. That's about the only nod we make to that space.
It's not over-designed.
It's not over-designed.
Not too specific.
Yeah.
I think with it being a mature market, as we really could lean on the data that we've got historically and assets that have performed well historically, and just using that to inform the spaces that we are going ahead to design.
So we're going to move on to another major theme, which is wellbeing and experience. We're seeing growing demand for workspace, fitness, outdoor areas, social spaces. Lesley, you've highlighted how co-working, pet-friendly features and shared spaces have become central to modern schemes. How much of this is expected as standard?
Well, with the Renters' Rights Act coming in imminently, pet acceptance is obviously something we do anyway. So, and I think that we might see a slight uptick in things like pet ownership, pet occupation. And I mean, is it a hygiene factor? I think it's smart to build it in because otherwise we're now going to have to deal with, if we hadn't already, how to actually deal with, surfaces that don't attract dog hair, for example. But in the sense of, what did we say? Pet amenities, co-working and shared spaces. I think within BTR it's now becoming standard, and gyms I would add to that list for sure, because BTR often attracts a premium because it has all of these amenities into it. To your point, we may see a rise in assets that have a BTR amenity light, and I think there's a place for that as well. I think there's a spectrum. We have enough market demand to have a spectrum. However, I think if you're going to have a higher end premium BTR development, these things are expected. Very competitive sector, and I do think that people come for the product, the sell, the wow factor of design. I think they stay for the experience and the fact that the co-working works well, the pet amenity and facilities are actually functioning and they're usable. And the fact that we've got the shared spaces that do facilitate proper usability and are enjoyable, that's why they will, and then the customer service on top of that, that's why they'll stay.
And Sophie, from a design perspective, what does wellness-led design actually look like in a build-to-rent environment today?
Well, obviously we've got gyms, which I think is the first kind of your first thought when you think of wellness, and that is a non-negotiable, I really do believe. I think we're looking at trends in hospitality that's all about wellness and longevity, so that gym and that kind of wellness element can't disappear. But there's almost also that element of community. Again, London and cities in general are quite a lonely place to live in, so facilitating spaces that allow people to come together, allow you to meet your neighbour, have that conversation that you may not have if you don't live in a shared space, is really going to be crucial in creating a wellness offering.
I think the other thing to add to this about, if you think about wellness, it's obviously the fitness, but it's also light, it's air, it's accessibility to outside. So in London, and many BTR developments, it's not uncommon not to have balconies. But I also do think that they're a feature that adds a lot to people's lifestyle, or rooftop amenities, or podium gardens, the ability to have well aspect and lots of windows without adding on lots of costs for cleaning and so forth. So I think that those aspects are really important in people's lifestyles, because, you know, anybody who lives in London knows January through to March is pretty grim. So the ability to have light and to be able to get outside and enjoy those spaces is pretty important.
I also think a consistency between when you get to your front door of the whole building right up to your apartment really will make an impact on someone's wellness as well. So you may have got off a really busy tube and you just want that breath of kind of, when you get into your development, I think that's really nice.
It's funny you say that, because when we think about wellness, the other part is about the sensory experience. So we're really big on sense as we walk in, like not just common sense, that's a hygiene factor, but the scent as somebody walks in, and the musics and the sounds that they hear. This is it's like walking into a beautiful hotel. You go, oh, I've arrived. And it at the front, I mean, hopefully leading up to the building, there's an experience that is good. It's not always the case. Can't control some of those things. But when you walk into the building, that's within our control. And that's when someone walks through the door and they go, I'm so glad I'm home.
I did it here. I walked in and I said to concierge, I said, oh, it smells wonderful in here. Yeah. I think buildings where you use all of your senses, I think that makes a big difference. Because people, they always think it's just your eyes, but actually as human beings, any experience that uses all 5 senses, I'm all for.
It's also that difference, isn't it, between fitness and well-being. And I think if we think back to COVID, Build to Rent did a really good job where the amenities weren't available to really focus on well-being. And I think that's continued post-COVID. And so it's we can talk about fitness and gyms, which is obviously really important, but what you're talking about is a sense of well-being, because there's a sense of community.
And it's also, and I think that well-being extends to people looking out for each other. So we talk a lot about the community, but it's also about facilitating events, and it might just be a yoga class on the rooftop, and come and or come and all join with your pets, or just come down, do your jigsaw, do a bit of mindfulness, or we can sit down and have a powwow. Whatever it is, there's a holistic approach to wellness and well-being, which is physical, emotional, mental. And I think that's really important part of the custodial or pastoral offer that BTR can provide, but also for the operators is a really big part of what we do. I think that's quite important recognition that we have a big influence on people's lives. Design is definitely one element, and there's a whole lot of other aspects to that.
Justine, do these features genuinely drive retention and occupancy, or are they more about attracting residents initially?
I think it's actually both. I think they attract residents, but actually when the data that we've got on a pension fund that we operate for, they give their residents access to an online doctor. They actually give them private medical. There's lots of additional benefits that they get. And actually they've got one of the lowest churn rates in the portfolios that we operate for. So yes, I think, it will attract, but you're still going to be paying a premium for that. But to Lesley's point, it is going to be the value add that the resident gets, but also how it's operated and the service. And when we're finding that these institutional clients are treating residents as customers, that adds to retention as well.
I agree with you. I also don't think that people make typically the decision on one particular thing.
Agreed.
I think it's a compilation that fits their particular profile of what's important to them. A little bit, like the choice of the buffet, you might choose a type of buffet that your preference is, but you like the selection within there because it's got the most things that you would tend to use and find value in. And really what we're talking about here is a value proposition that fits the profile of the resident. And I also think that sometimes people may not realise what they are going to use and what they value until they've experienced it. It's a little bit like, Apple's done a great job of saying I didn't know I needed or wanted that until I've experienced it, and now I can't live without it. So BTR has we definitely have some ways to go to educating our public around the benefits, but it's I don't know the statistics, and it'd be really interesting to find out how many people have gone into BTR as in a resident, a customer, and then said, actually, no, it's not for me. I'm going back into the PRS because I prefer private landlords, or I prefer, a Victorian conversion over a purpose-built rental. It'd be really interesting to see the reasons why they might move back and forth,
but also,
outside of location and price.
Also, as you say, it's like the decision-making process is very broad. And what we see with the mystery shopping is that people knowing it's build to rent a lot of the time, they're not conscious of the fact that the landlord might be a different type of landlord that is interested in your well-being. I think that those things, the sales process of those things comes later and can be quite subtle, because there's so many other things to do during the tour. So I think that
and
you're
big
right.
Things to sell.
Yeah,
pool.
like location, price, those things are like the drivers, aren't they? So let's turn to sustainability, which comes through in the report as both a priority and a complexity. There's a clear message that while ESG matters, affordability still plays a major role in decision making. Justine, you described sustainability as moving from a nice to have to a real decision driver, particularly when it translates into tangible benefits for residents. How far along that journey do you think we are?
I think the sustainability piece is really interesting. And I think if you look at the demographics of renters and the age group, they're a lot more, my age group, for example, I'm a millennial, we don't look at EPCs. It's just not a thing. I wouldn't look at an EPC and go, oh, it's this. I need to, I'm not going to buy that because I'll have to do too much work. But what we're finding with the demographics of residents that are moving into a lot of the BTR schemes, they are very aware now of EPCs. I think, again, I go back to the value add piece. We're seeing Octopus do a lot of partnerships now, and that has been a real driver. And actually, for me being a millennial, I thought, oh, I'm not really interested in that. But actually, what I'm seeing with our asset managers is that, these people are actually looking at X, Y, and Z.
Are they looking at it because they're conscious of the environment, or are they looking at it because of the bills?
It's the value add piece. Yeah.
In what way, though?
So in terms of what are they getting out of it, whereas someone like
the
bills. There is a house builder that has done some amazing work. They have their own grid on site, and again, that's drawing a lot of attention. And people, the demographics of the residents that would move into it seem to love it. Whereas for me, it wouldn't be a driver. It wouldn't be a driver for me. No. There's lots of other things, but I think it's very, demographic led. If Sandra Jones was here, she'd be like, right, this is this and that. Yeah, absolutely. Yes, yeah, exactly.
And Lesley, you made the point that sustainability is often valued because it reduces living costs, which I think, for me, is a perfectly good, legitimate reason for doing it, and the output is positive for whatever the reason. So it's not just for sort of ethical reasons. But how should developers respond to that?
I think we all have a moral obligation to do the best by the environment as we can. But the realities are that companies typically are here to make some money. So it's difficult to put ESG into the agenda and to reduce the margins. And that's really tough for developers. There's so many pressures on development these days, and the environment is not necessarily always well represented, because everything else is yelling louder, and that one can often give. It's still a responsibility for developers to do it where they can. Brent Cross town is a net zero town, and it's one of the first, if not the only one that I know of. And it's tough. So we've built an energy centre and it powers the whole estate. So that's something that helps enormously in controlling energy bills. Obviously that helps with residents. It's a really good sell and means that they've got more disposable income to do other things. But also the way in which we build buildings these days, they're so energy efficient. It's unbelievable. Now they're overheating because they're so energy efficient. And that's then of course you're thinking about, well, the requirement to actually be able to open the windows, but then that conflicts with the noise levels because you're a location near an airport or near somewhere else. And so you go around in the circles with this sort of thing, which is really difficult. But I think that it's an important part of the agenda. I think everybody has to play a part and should play a part. I think the reality is that it often gets compromised because of all the other pressures that are around us. And I'd like to think that people will pay more because of ESG, and hopefully that will continue, but I don't know if it's necessarily the reality at the moment, particularly with the economic circumstance. There are so many pressures on incomes and on development, and that combination means that generally something has to give, which is a shame.
Yeah. And Sophie, how does sustainability influence interior design decisions, particularly when balancing materials and durability and cost and overall quality?
So I think, again, it does just have to come down to the bills side of things. Choosing sustainable materials that will reduce costs on the residents' bills is really the primary kind of point where we're at the minute. You know, we don't have customers asking, you know, what the makeup is of their side table or is there recycled plastic on their sofa. We can do those things because that's what we believe in. But at the minute, we aren't just seeing quite that response and that take up from residents. But I do think it will come. I do, you know, even just like among my friends, like the amount that maybe it's the age we've hit, like talking about recycling our soft plastics and that kind of thing. I do think there is an awareness overall in the market and in kind of socially that we should be doing more towards the environment, and we should be, you know, investing in what we can when we have the opportunity to do so.
I think just coming back to something I thought about is like developers, I think, can raise the bar, but also can help raise awareness about exactly that. Like ask the suppliers, you know, what's the difference between this and this? What's the life cycle? What are the materials? Make more informed choices. And I think suppliers could probably respond in doing the same, saying, look, we can do this product. It might be 3% more expensive, but actually what it does do is reduce your carbon footprint, or it might extend the life cycle of the product, and actually have you thought about this, this, and this, and those sorts of things. I think if we all play, it's like when you play tennis against someone who's better than you, you play better tennis. So if we can all be a better tennis player, we could potentially lift the game. And you know, being in my Wimbledon colours, going in theme
clearly
with the tennis balls down here.
Yeah. I think from what we see, if we're involved in the procurement of the interior design and furniture, that depending who the client is, but particularly from the institutions, they are really interested in the in the company that's delivering and their credentials. I think maybe where the gap is that that's not necessarily communicated to the customer, but also maybe, you know, a lot wouldn't care, to be honest. But maybe also in today's world, the customer just expects it to be environmentally sustainable, for whether that's low energy bills or where the materials are coming from. You know, I think maybe there's just a sort of expectation that has been thought through, and that it's not something that has to be highlighted separately. I don't know, but particularly from the procurement, we see it as a big part of the procurement process. So.
I also think that another factor in this is, as a developer, is like, what's your hold? What's your period of time in which you're going to be holding this product and responsible for it, and so forth? So
it's important.
Yeah, so you can, you know, your return on investment and your life cycle for these things, if you're still holding the baby at the end you care a lot more about what you enter into in the first instance. If you're flipping it maybe you don't have as much carry in the outcome at the end.
Looking ahead, the report suggests a market that will continue to evolve with more mixed tenure developments, broader locations and a stronger focus on service and experience. Justine, what do you see as the biggest structural shift coming in the next 5 years?
I think there's going to be, single family we're seeing is on the rise, but one of the biggest things that we're starting to see, especially when I'm going to underwrite, is the amenity light BTR schemes. And I think what is probably coming through the BPF is, well, I'm hoping that there'll be a change to planning. I'm hoping that the government will have a look at how BTR schemes are put through, because at the moment they're put through the same planning lens. When house builders are doing their bits, I'd like it to be separated, but I do think that is coming. So I think planning will improve.
And Lesley, from an operational perspective, what will define a successful build-to-rent scheme in the future, particularly if amenities aren't the differentiator?
Yeah, okay. Excluding amenities, I still think that there's a lot to be said for product design and product durability. The OPEX is something that's always under pressure, and CapEx inevitably is always going to be under pressure as well. So the longevity of these schemes is really important. I would also say, of course, community service, those are the differentiators. Those are the things that, as I've said before, the product is what might attract people in the first place, but they'll stay for the service. They'll stay because they feel like their sense of belonging and it's home. So I think those aspects, it's going to be a combination, because if the product isn't good, they may not want to stay if the service still is excellent. But I think that the service is, that product durability and keeping a product up to standard is a hygiene factor, and then the added value of that is the service and the community.
And Sophie, how do you see the role of interior design evolving as the sector matures?
I think it's just got to work harder. You've got to, you're up against more competition, you're up against ageing assets, new assets. I think we've just got to make sure the space is earning its keep, let's say. So whether that be apartments or amenities, I think, really investing in the process earlier on will help you long term.
And a final question for each of you. In one sentence, what does great build to rent look like to live in today? Sophie, do you want to go first?
Oh, well, for me, it's happy tenants. I like to see people that are really enjoying the spaces that I design. So I think that's always going to be number one for me.
Life is already difficult, so it needs to be effortless living.
Great build to rent living looks like home.
Very good. Thank you all very much. What comes through very clearly is that the London build-to-rent market is no longer just about delivering homes. It's about delivering quality, consistency and experience at scale. From demand-led growth and institutional investment to design, sustainability and resident well-being, every part of the model is evolving. And perhaps most importantly, there are ever-increasing demands on this customer-focused sector, with residents expecting homes that are not just functional, but meaningful, flexible, and designed around how they live. For developers, investors, and operators, the opportunity is clear. Those who can align design, operations, and value will be best placed to succeed in the next phase of the London build-to-rent market. A huge thank you to our panellists, and thank you all for joining.